In today's Farm Report, the Agricultural Act of 2014, commonly known as the Farm Bill, turned 1 year old this week. Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more on how this historic piece of legislation has changed American agriculture.
I'm now going to sign this Farm Bill.
It was just over 1 year ago that President Obama signed the Farm Bill into law, setting in motion a frenzy of activity at the Agriculture Department to implement all of the programs in this 950-page plus piece of legislation.
It's been a very aggressive, very busy, and I think a very result-oriented effort here.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack telling reporters the other day that thanks to some dedicated USDA employees, some of whom have been working nights and weekends and holidays, it's the fastest Farm Bill implementation in recent memory.
I think it pushes back on the notion that government is not working. And in fact, I think this is a strong case to suggest that there are aspects of government that are working and working well.
The Farm Bill seems to be already working for producers like Michigan's Ben LaCrosse.
The Farm Bill has had a tremendous impact on my beloved cherry crop,
which was wiped out in 2012 by an early bloom and then a freeze, and it happened to a lot of Michigan cherry farmers.
At the time of that disaster, cherries were not eligible for crop insurance. Provisions of this Farm Bill allowed farmers like me to purchase coverage to retroactively insure our fruit. The coverage level was minimal for most producers, but Farm Bill support has allowed most all cherry growers to overcome that disaster.
And in Alabama, Edgar Pruitt, who's only been farming for 5 years, told us that without the Farm Bill programs,
I'm absolutely convinced I would not be as far along in my fifth year as I am today.
But the bill also has non-farm programs, including nutrition assistance, housing loans, community facility loans for things like water systems, sewer systems, broadband, schools, firehouses, hospitals. And Tom Vilsack said, yes, people call it the Farm Bill.
But in my view, it's a farm bill, it's a jobs bill, it's a trade bill, it's an innovation bill, it's a conservation bill, it's an energy bill. It's an infrastructure bill. That's why this bill is important, and that's why we celebrate the first year of its existence.
He said he's making a big deal out of this because he wants people to realize
every American ultimately gets impacted and affected by this thing called the Farm Bill.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
USDA's latest supply and demand estimates for corn noted an increase in corn used for ethanol.
We did increase our corn grind for ethanol slightly. Because gasoline prices have come down so much, EIA has increased their expectation for consumer demand for gasoline. Increased demand for gasoline means more ethanol demand for mixing with gasoline, and for the most part at a 10% blend in E10.
Acting Chief Economist Robert Johansson says the 1.4% month-to-month increase in corn use for ethanol and 2.3% year-over-year rise is one of the demand categories in the February balance sheet that is on the upside. Johansson says even with larger ending stocks forecasted for corn from the previous year, when it comes to the prices growers should receive,
we're not expecting a change in price in corn. We're staying at $3.65 a bushel for the rest of the marketing year. We're at 40% marketed so far at $3.60 a bushel, so 60% of the rest of the crop to be marketed at $3.70, which is roughly where the prices are at right now.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
2015 is the International Year of Soils, and as part of that celebration, we look at soil as a habitat. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more.
Do we think of soil as its own kind of habitat? We should, according to David Lamb of the Natural Resources Conservation Service in North Carolina, as soils support living organisms.
Soil is a habitat for soil microbes, and if we get that one right, if we understand and start managing our soils as habitat, then all those other soil functions of water cycling and nutrient cycling and so forth fall into place.
And what a healthy soil habitat does is lead to more of the beneficial microbes needed to sustain plant life, and in turn, sustain life as a whole.
The key is creating the habitat that allows the widest variety or diversity of microbes to flourish and do what they can do in the soil.
So to help us understand the concept of soils as habitat, Lamb uses the following illustration.
A soil microbe or an elephant is a living organism, and they all have to have three basic things to survive. They need to have a water source, they need to have a food source, and they need to have shelter or a place to live. And the management activities that we do, such as tillage or grazing or what have you, affect that habitat.
He compares a crop field that is regularly disturbed versus a field where conservation measures and other practices are used to protect and conserve soil.
A lot of our agricultural fields that have a lot of disturbance through tillage or that type of activity tend to only allow those microbes that can survive under those conditions, which tend to be bacteria-driven. Well, that's fine, but unfortunately, that's the limited range. Only a typical crop field may only have 2,000 different species of bacteria, so to speak. Or if you look at a healthy soil, one that's in a farm according to some basic soil health principles or in a natural system, it may have 20,000 different species.
So for an example of the importance of soil microbes and the relationship with plant life,
well, there's a microbe in the soil. It's called an abiscular mycorrhizal fungi. Now, that's a mouthful, but what it does, it actually lives in harmony with the plant roots, and it actually lives within the cell of the plant, and it sends out a little microscopic hair, a hyphae, that goes into the soil, and it gives the plant water, and it brings in nutrients as phosphorus and zinc. In exchange, the plant gives it food. Well, creating the positive habitat for those to survive allows your plants to expand their root system, so to speak.
And the more diverse the microbe population is within soil, the greater its resiliency.
The more diversity you have, when you have something like a drought or you have a flood or something comes in that may impact negatively a certain range or spectrum of microbes, well, then you have others that can kind of fill in the spot to do those soil functions of nutrient cycling and water infiltration and those types of things.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Not a lot of new market-shaking news, it seems, from the latest round of Agriculture Department reports for wheat, reduced export prospects, the strong U.S. dollar, and competition from big wheat crops in Europe, keeping U.S. exports down and bringing the season average price down to $6 a bushel. For corn, USDA projecting more ethanol production than expected, which will take ending stocks down by 50 million bushels. Price averaging the same, though, as previously, $3.65 a bushel. Soybeans, the demand side of things is up. Exports projected 20 million bushels higher than expected, but not enough to change the USDA price outlook, averaging $9.70 a bushel. Cotton, the export side, looking not too bad. The U.S. expected to capture 31% of the world market in cotton, the largest share in 4 seasons. Still, the price effects, not much. USDA projecting 61 cents a pound cotton. Finally, the USDA with a new orange crop projection. No changes from the last one at 6.72 million tons, 1% less than last season. Florida's crop coming in 2% less. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.